Hello. For those who haven't met me yet, I'm Mrs. Bonnerts, and I am going to do your video lesson today. So if you would turn to the next blank page in your math notebook, we're going to start with today's date, which I'm just going to write the word date. You're going to actually fill in today's date. Then I'm going to put the learning target. I'm going to start with LT. You don't have to write LT, but that helps me know that that's what my learning target is. And our learning target today is to, we want to be able to divide with the decimals. I'm going to pause the video here for you to make sure that you have the date and the learning target written down. Because of how I'm going to set my problems up, I'm actually going to fold my paper over lightly. I don't need to make a firm crease, but just a light crease to kind of divide my paper into two. On this side, we're going to do some examples, and on this side, you're going to practice. So our first example is going to be 18 5/10 divided by 5. And I'm going to write it out horizontally and give you a second to think about how that would look if I were to set it up this way. What number goes in the house? Call this the house. That's not a fancy mathematical term, but and what number goes in front of the house? So this is called the dividend. And the dividend goes in the house, the first number. And this is called the divisor. And the divisor goes in at the door. The answer to a division problem is called the quotient. So you should be familiar with all of those words. I like to think of it as the divisor is at the door. The first, these were two dogs. The first dog would get into the house. I can also write this division problem as a fraction, because every fraction is also a division problem, and every division problem is also a fraction. So there's a number of different ways to write this. When I'm actually working with decimals, I'm going to choose this method. So I'm going to set this up as 18 5/10 divided by 5. And if we go back to what you learned yesterday about multiplication, one of the things that we want to do before we start the problem is to think about what it would look like if I were estimating. So 18.5 would be about 20. And then if I divided 20 by 5, I know that my answer should be about 4. So I'm just going to write over here that it's about 4. And those squiggly lines, it's kind of like having a wavy line. That means that it's about. That's my estimate. So I'm going to go about and do my division as if my decimal didn't exist. Kind of like yesterday we did multiplication initially as if the decimal didn't exist, and then we came back and put the decimal in. So I'm going to ask myself how many times does 5 go into 1? Well, it's 0, so I could write a 0 there, or I could just leave it blank. Then I ask myself how many times does 5 go into 18, and that would be 3 times. I have to be really careful when I'm dividing with decimals that I am lining up my digits correctly, because I will also be lining up my decimal points eventually. So I want to make sure that that 3 is above the 8. It's not above the 1 because 5 doesn't go into 1 3 times. 5 goes into 18 3 times. Then I'm going to multiply. 3 times 5 is 15. Then I'm going to subtract and carry down. Notice that I did not carry down the decimal point. Then I'm asking myself how many times does 5 go into 35, and the answer there is 7. And again, I'm going to line up and put that 7 right above that 5, which is what I carried down. So again, the lining up is really important. I put a little dot here to recognize that I wasn't putting a number there, but I don't want us to get confused that that looks like a decimal, so I'm going to erase that little dot. The beauty of erasable pens. And now, again, I know that my answer should be about 4, so I know that my answer is not going to be 0.37. It's not going to be 37 point something. It's going to be 3 7/10. And I'm going to notice that that decimal came straight up into my answer. So my answer for this one is, my quotient is 3 7/10. Now I'm going to give you one similar to practice. Your practice problem is going to be 36 9/10 divided by 9. And before I stop the video to have you practice that, I'm going to come back over to this problem. And we know that anytime we do division, we can check our work with multiplication. So I want to at least do a reasonableness check with multiplication. So that would tell me that these two numbers are my factors, and that's my product. So I should be able to multiply 3 7/10 times 5 and get 18.5, or 18 5/10. And I have one digit to the right of the decimal point, and here I have one digit to the right of the decimal point. So I've checked and I know that that decimal placement is correct. So here's your practice problem. I'm going to pause the video, ask you to enter your answer, and then we'll check our work. So here's the practice problem you should have entered for your quotient 4 1/10. If you do not have this work shown in your notes, go ahead and, again, don't erase, but go ahead and cross out what you did incorrectly and then do it correctly right next to it, so that you can draw your attention to the mistake that you potentially made. Next, I'm going to go on to example number 2. This problem I'm going to start with 18 5/10, but this time I'm going to divide it by 0 5/10. Again, I'm going to think about an estimate first, so this would be about 20, and I would be divided by about a half, well, exactly a half. So if I'm dividing 20 into parts that are half a part each, I know that each one is going to be 2 parts, so this is going to equal 40. So I know that my answer should be about 40. Now I'm going to write it with the dividend inside of the division house, the divisor out front. And again, I'm going to be really clear with where my decimals are. On this one, it is a little bit more important that we pay attention to our decimals at the beginning. So I never want to have a decimal out here. So having a decimal out here makes it difficult for me to divide. So I want to change this so there is no decimal. So to get rid of that decimal, I would have to multiply times 10. So I would take this number and multiply times 10 to make that 5. If I'm going to multiply this times 10, I also have to multiply this times 10. So if I multiplied 18 5/10 by 10, I would multiply by 10 and it would move the decimal over here. So in both cases I have moved my decimal over one place. And let's just look real quickly at why I have to do that. So I'm going to write down here 18 5/10, and I'm going to write this as a fraction, because we know that every division problem is a fraction and every fraction is a division problem. So when I have this written down as a fraction, I know that to get an equivalent fraction, I could multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same thing. So if I'm going to multiply the denominator, which in this case is the divisor, by 10, I also have to multiply the numerator times 10 in order to keep an equivalent fraction. So I want to keep an equivalent division problem, so I'm going to multiply the divisor times 10 and I'm going to multiply the dividend times 10. Once I do that, I can move my decimal point straight up and do my division problem just like I did in the previous one. The 5 went into 18 3 times. The 5 went into 35 7 times. So again, I'm really being careful about how to line that up. And then my decimal is there. There's nothing left at the end, so I'm just going to put a 0. So I'm going to give you now a practice problem for that. And let's do 24 and 8/10 divided by 0 and 4/10. So I'm going to pause and have you enter your answer, and then once you do, it will continue on to the solution. I'm hoping on this problem you found your answer was 62. I'm also hoping that you did a multiplication problem to check your work. I did not on my example, so I did not model it well for you, but to do a multiplication problem, especially if you tend to make mistakes with the decimal placement or with your division, to check it with multiplication is always a good idea. Our last example is going to be 27 and 51/100 divided by 5 thousandths. I'm going to rewrite that division problem using the division house. I will look at the divisor and notice that I have a decimal and I don't want to have a decimal in my divisor. So I need to move it over 2 places, which is I achieve that by multiplying times 100. So I want you to be able to know that moving the decimal is a result of multiplying or dividing by multiples of 10. So I'm going to multiply by 100. If I do that here, it moves the decimal 2 places. But I also have to move the decimal over here 2 places. But if I move it 1, it's right here and I can't move it any further. And that's where I have to be thinking that I'm really multiplying by 100. So if I'm multiplying by 100, it's going to add up, it's going to add another 0. So I've moved it 2 places here, I'm going to move it 2 places here, then it's going to come straight up, and in my final answer it's going to be right there. Then I'm going to do the division as if I didn't have any decimals anywhere. So 5 goes into 2 0 times, 5 goes into 27 5 times, 5 times 5 is 25, 27 minus 25 is 2. I'm going to bring down one number at a time. 5 goes into 25 5 times. I still need to bring down that 0, and 5 goes into 0 0 times. So my answer for this one is going to be 550. A sample for you to do along these lines is 27 and 5/10 divided by 7/100. I'm sorry, I wrote down the wrong problem there. Let's do 24 and 3/10 divided by 9/100. Again, I'm going to pause the video, you enter your answer, and then you can continue. Alright, now that you've had an opportunity to do that problem, go ahead and check your work comparing it to mine. If you've made a mistake, you can cross it out and write the correct work next to it. Your quotient or your answer should be 270. These are all the notes we have for today. So you can rewatch this video as many times as you need, and then we're going to ask you to take a picture of your notes and upload it into your math notebook or your digital portfolio. So that's it for today. Thanks.